Welcome back.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit, as you could tell by Will's facial hair. Right?
Yeah.
You've grown it out a little bit. But yeah, let's talk about where we've been so far and where we're going. Obviously, we've had 2 episodes already on sort of think then do, right?
Yep.
And then
Don't design without a strategy.
Yep. So let's recap those for the audience a little bit, and and I'll jive in with some of the specifics of the product that I'm building.
Sure. Yeah. With Think Then Do, it was really just the first phase of product development where we decided we needed a strategy. Like, what are we trying to achieve here? Not necessarily what is every feature we're going to build, but what does Jimmy want to achieve with this new product that he's building, right? High level, were there any business goals? Were there any, things like that? And we ended up with an artifact at the end of that, really just like a page and a half, nothing crazy. That was our strategy that became our sort of guiding North Star for what we're going to build. Next, what we decided to do was don't design without a strategy, right? Which is, we had this artifact, we finished that part. Now we can start the design phase. And for us, it was really about writing a spec. And I think we have a little bit to talk about here because that process of writing a spec was, I think, ideal for the audience here to hear because it wasn't linear.
It was not.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about what that purpose was and why we needed to go back and forth.
Yeah. So the idea of writing a spec is just basically that we're trying to solve problems at higher levels of abstraction before we solve problems at lower levels of abstraction. And there's good reasons to do this. One of the reasons is because it's a lot cheaper to adjust words on a page, higher level of abstraction, than lines of code, right? Once you're writing code and you have lots of files, every little change that you make has impacts on other parts of the system. But if we could have just known better what we were doing before, writing a good strategy and writing a good spec, we actually save ourselves time over the process of building the product. It seems counterintuitive because you're like, well, I know what I want to do. I'm just going to start doing it. But really what you find out many times, our process that we just went through is not rare. Right? It happens all the time. You think you know what you want to do, and it turns out you don't until you write it down and you look at it and you're like, well, that's way too big. Or I had no idea that it was going to get this complicated here, right? And so you write a specification because you want to minimize the risk of later stages of the process. There's lots of ways to do that, right? It can be words on a page, it can be pixels on a page and designs. For us, we decided to write things because that's what we're good at, but also because we weren't building a visual web app with lots of different, with a high bar for commercial success. That wasn't the type of product we were building. So it was mostly just words on a page. And we talked about, what makes a good spec, right? Listing out all the requirements, trying to get the technical data model down on the technical speccing side, again, de-risking the project. And when you go through that process and then you sit down to write code, one is you can manage your own, code better at that point. A lot of the hard decisions, conceptual decisions have been made for you, and you can do the coding work instead of doing the coding work and making those conceptual decisions at the same time, which bog down projects and really get you to build the wrong thing.
Yeah, one of the things that I found very useful during this sort of back and forth was, just sort of seeing how much work each thing was and seeing what was important to me, because I don't think that was apparent, I think, in the first episode where we were just sort of okay, what is it that we want to build? And going back to it and then thinking about it some more, it really kind of gave me a 30,000 foot level view of what it was. And seeing it at that level, you're not down in the code, right? Trying to make something, and you're able to sort of adjust a little bit more easily and say, okay, you know what, that feature isn't really that important.
Yeah.
I don't think people are actually going to use it. And this other feature, on the other hand, is like going to be huge because it's going. It means a lot. So I really appreciated that part. And I don't know, for me as a coder, one of the things that you said that really stood out to me was that it's a lot easier to change now than later, and it isn't necessarily because you're so far along, although that's certainly a part of it. But a part of it is that there's like an emotional investment in whatever you're building, right?
Yeah, I spend days on this code.
Yeah. As a coder, and one of the things that you said to me while we were going back and forth is, it's not a big deal if you change it because I only spent like an hour on it. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Because like if you do spend, and I've had this happen to me at startups or whatever, where I've spent like 2-3 weeks on a code, on some code or feature or like whatever, and then they're like, you know what, we're gonna scrap it, and it's just devastating, right? Like emotionally devastating to a coder, even if you're getting paid or whatever, to see your project just kind of disappear. There's like a component of being attached to something just because you've built it that you're more able to be objective about as a result of like catching it early.
Yeah, I mean, like I had some similar feelings. I mean, what surprised me was how well, I mean, to a certain extent, I know you're building a real product. For me, I'm kind of LARPing here. Like this isn't my project. I don't work for you. I'm not being paid, but it's fun to do. And what was notable to me was how well our strategy stood up, right? We wrote that strategy document and I was looking at it, I was like, I didn't know right off the bat if it was good or not. But when we started speccing later, the strategy document held up great. So for everyone listening is, the first spec I wrote was right outside here. Jimmy was sitting across from me and he was looking into wallet infrastructure and all this stuff. About an hour and a half, I wrote the whole first spec just in that hour and a half. I'm pretty good at this, but also it's just not that hard, right? Because we had a good strategy doc and I knew what I needed to do. It was like 2.5, 3 pages. And, it had some holes in it, but also it made us realize really quickly, we read it. I remember you went home that night and you were writing comments and stuff in there. And we realized like, we don't want to build this at all. Right. And so then the question was, okay, we don't want to build what I just wrote. Right. And mostly it wasn't because it was a bad spec. It was because it was a really much bigger than we were anticipating, I think. And we were looking at it and saying like, oh, well, there's better ways to do this now that I see this on paper. And that's when I told you, I was like, oh, it took me an hour and a half. Like let's just change it, right? Like let's just go.
Let's swim upstream. Yeah.
What was remarkable to me though is that the feedback you were giving, we talk about this idea of the product development process not being a linear thing. You go from one stage to the next stage and you perfect it, and then you loop around. That's iterating, right? If the spec isn't going well, the first question you have to ask yourself is, did we write the wrong strategy? And I remember I sat down with you and we read the strategy and it was like, nope, we still want to do that. We just don't like this implementation of it, right? So what was the cost? The opportunity cost there was an hour and a half of our time, right? And then we wrote a much smaller spec the second time around. We looked at that and said, yeah, we do want to build this, right? And it needed some updates. Like I couldn't provide the data model and stuff like that and stuff for you to add. But at the end of the day, our strategy held up very, very well. The first version of the spec, we could have built that product, but it would have just been bigger than what we wanted to build and actually not necessarily satisfy everything we wanted to do. And we found a more efficient way to do it. That's the process working. It's not a failure. And we didn't fail big. We failed very, very small. And failing small is fine. Failing big is just a tragedy.
Which happens in a lot of projects, right? So just to give the audience details. So what we originally, the first version of the spec had a website for all the users of the bank, right? And
the bank of
Song.
The bank of Song. That's right. Even got the domain name.
And we took out the domain, all that. But the idea was that I would build the web infrastructure where they can log in and go see everything. And then I was like, you know what? Like, why do we like this is a lot to build, right? Because
we're gonna do Google sign on, like all those different things,
and you know, like just running a website and stuff like that is a lot of work, and especially if you're hoping that you know there are more people that will take this up for their families and so on. That's not simple. I mean, it's doable if you run like an Umbrel and maybe there's like a button to like install it or something. But then the big insight for me was, okay, you know, you want to offload most of the work to the person that knows the most stuff. And that's the person that's actually the bank, right? Like the person that's actually running it, the trusted family member, as it were. And you know, for the person that's you know, has an account at your, you know, family bank or whatever, they just want to know their balance, maybe withdraw once in a while, possibly deposit, but even that is like kind of questionable. So we came up with this other model where it's like, you know, instead of having a website, let's give them a wallet, a watch-only wallet that they can look up on their phone anytime, right? There's no security risk with that because they can just look at it. They can't spend anything.
The only security risk would be privacy.
Yeah, privacy would be the main security risk with the loss of phone and unlocking or whatever. But like they're not going to be able to do anything bad. And the person that's actually in charge does a lot of the stuff in the background anyway. So that's what we came up with. Now we don't have to build this entire website.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really, you know, funny thing. We were trying to keep it small even at the beginning, and then we had authentication to handle. And then I remember the first spec even had these things where they could automatically withdraw up to $100 directly on Lightning. You know, but they couldn't do more than that. So now we had all these conditionals that we had to build in, all this business logic. You know, even a small app like that is, you know, it's not hard to host an app like that. It's hard to maintain an app like that.
Right.
And especially when there's a lot of good other tools, secure tools that you can use that are more secure than what we could have built for this type of application.
Yeah,
right?
and specifically, like, you know, the attack surface on a website is like enormous. Like, there's so many people that know how to attack websites, SQL injection attacks, and all kinds of stuff, denial service, whatever. You eliminate that all of that security stuff goes away.
Yeah, so we could just use Blue Wallet.
Yeah,
instead.
Just Blue Wallet with a descriptor, and they're good. And this is the part where the research kind of came into play, because I didn't actually know that this was possible until you told me, hey, you know, at Unchained we used to do this and this, and you can have unhardened derivations on BIP32 addresses that you know that can be separated and so on. I was like, that's perfect. I can use this.
I can have accounts.
Basically use accounts for everybody. And you know, I know on the back end how much they have or whatever, but there's no mixing of anything, and all of that is just sort of kept on chain. And I know exactly how much everyone has, and they only know their own. And then I can and then I started thinking more about the other part of the product, which has grown a lot bigger, which is the sort of like the fail safe, like what happens if I die. And this, it turns out, is actually the bigger part of the product.
It's very hard. And most products that exist today do not solve this gracefully. Some of them solve it, but there's a lot of people involved in a very little amount of software. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're still trying to spec this out a little bit, but the main idea that I wanted to get, and this is something that I think is doable, is some sort of like dead man switch, right? Where if I disappear for over 3 months or something like that, then there's like a transaction that's already been prepared that sends everybody their coins on the Kraken or Coinbase account or whatever it is, so that at the very least they have their money.
They can get it and they can sell it for dollars, or they can do your dad.
Pay their taxes or whatever. But like they still get possession of their own thing, and that. It turns out I believe I can do it, but there are all kinds of little things that I have to think about, like you know, how do I make it so that it does actually trigger, and where is this transaction stored? How does it get updated? And depending on the UTXOs that result, then you have to constantly be updating and stuff like that. But that, I'm okay with a lot of the burden actually being on the person that knows what they're doing, because that's kind of where the burden should be, because they're
and that's an enormous amount of software to write.
Yeah,
to do all of that.
I have ideas on making it.
I'm saying the burden being on you as a human, instead of on the software application. Was what I meant. It's you don't actually want to abstract all of that.
And you want sort of that relationship that you have with the people that are members of your family or possibly friends.
You're their banker.
You want that relationship to sort of be face to face and not sort of automated and done over the internet only and stuff like that.
So that's an important point to make, because I'm sure there's a lot of Bitcoiners listening to this being like, well, now you've just built this giant trusted third party, which is Jimmy Song. That was the point. Our strategy is specifically set that Jimmy is going to be a trusted third party. This is not supposed to be cypherpunky. In fact, we want to abstract all the cypherpunky things away from the family members, that if it weren't for abstracting that, they wouldn't have Bitcoin. So the way to get them exposed in this way was to trust someone, and that the whole point of it was that Jimmy, their father or their uncle or whatever, was going to be that trusted third party, which was the point of the application.
Right. It's better than Coinbase or Kraken or whatever, but it's also worse than self-custody. But not everyone's ready, so this is the in-between product that we're working on.
Yeah. And the process that you just got into, I mean, if we're following along the phases of product development, right? And so phase 3 is don't build without a plan, which is basically you have your spec set. It's time to start writing code, which is pretty much where we're at this point. When we come back, you're going to have built something. At this point, we have the spec now. We'll publish that for everyone, and you're going to start writing code. But there's a part in that blog post where don't build without a plan, where I talk about knowing which mode of building you're in, between incremental development and iterative development. And I would argue right now that we are in an iterative development place. I actually prefer to be an incremental because you know all the answers already, right? And there's a guy, Jeff Patton, who wrote a brilliant blog post called I Don't Know What I Want, But I Know How to Get It. Look it up. It's fabulous. It's very short too, but I've been using this since 2008 when he wrote it, and it's still relevant today, where he basically gives the framework, the differentiation between incremental development and iterative development. And the way he does it is he has someone trying to paint the Mona Lisa. And the first person who's incrementing draws the left-hand corner perfectly, paint all the colors, everything, and makes their way over to the right-hand corner and all the way down, and then does the hairline and all the way down to the face, because when they think, well, what am I painting? They see in their head a perfect picture of the Mona Lisa. Okay. Right? So they know exactly how to increment through the painting and get that done. The iterative developer who is trying to paint the Mona Lisa, in their little thought bubble, they think a woman in a pastoral setting. Well, that's going to be a little bit tougher. So they sketch things with pencil and they undo it a little bit. And then they go over that, and then they paint in a little bit over here, and then they mix some color, and both of them need specs, right? One's just much more detailed than the other, right? When you're incrementing, you know exactly what you want, right? And you're going to figure everything out before you write a single line of code. And, that can fit more waterfall type methods or something like that. But you really want a process that's robust where you can do either, right? And I would say there's certain things that we're incrementing and certain things that we're iterating. We're kind of doing both, but we're more of an iterative fashion right now, because there are still some pretty major things that we don't know, but we feel like we have a good enough base at this point where we can iterate through the problem and write code without demolishing ourselves and costing ourselves a huge loss. So I think what people should recognize is that, like, when we talk about speccing and strategy and all this, we're not leaving any it's not a zero tolerance game we're playing. Where like, if you haven't figured out every single problem, you can't write a line of code. We want to figure out the bulk of it, right? And we want to be disciplined. And also it's important that if I, the PM or the executive or something like that, can picture the Mona Lisa perfectly, well, you better fucking write it. Right? You better do it, or else you're going to be iterating through a problem that I want you to increment through. And that's going to be a disaster and cause all these interrelational problems between us.
Because I'm going to think differently than you.
Yeah. Well, if I know exactly what I want, then I should be able to articulate that to you, right? In this case, I know pretty much what we want to do, right? Because we talked a lot, but I don't know exactly. So we're going to have to iterate through the problem.
Right. Yeah. And the interesting thing was while you were writing a lot of the strategy document, I was doing some research, and this is where we came to like the HD issue and stuff like that.
Yes.
And you know, my original thought was, well, man, it's going to be hard to have one set of hardware wallets for the multi-sig, and you know, like keep all the accounts separated. And this was where I got that additional piece of information.
The unhardened path.
Yeah. That non-hardened paths can be used, because I had researched this. Most wallets don't do this, and by default they're hardened paths, which means that you need the private key to create these accounts.
Yes.
Now you can do this, but then like on the back end, you have to keep lots and lots more data, and you have to import them into all the hardware wallets. So it becomes like this giant mess.
Well, there's some interesting history behind this problem actually that I learned at Unchained. You know, I didn't know this, but you know, there's no BIP that works for like collaborative custody.
There's a lot of BIPs that are missing.
Yeah. So like Unchained does it, and Casa does it, and Nunchuck does it, and Blockstream does it to a certain extent. There's a lot of people that do this, but there's not a standard for doing this, which means that as hardware wallets became more opinionated, you know, they start out as these little tools for single sig, but then people start using them for more things. But they would get opinionated about what BIP32 space was going to be allowed, right, to use, because people can do some pretty nasty things, and it can lead to coin loss if you don't know what you're doing, rejiggering BIP32 paths, right? Which meant that, you know, when we would talk to the hardware wallet manufacturers, to the Trezors and Ledgers and Cold Cards of the world, they really had to carve out special cases for the Unchains and Casas and Blockstreams of the world. And when I would talk to Casa and Blockstream, you know, we did things really differently, right? And so there needed to be a pretty wide range of exceptions for the hardware wallets in order to facilitate what these businesses were doing. And we actually started down the path of trying to write a new BIP. We worked with people like Michael Flaxman and like very knowledgeable people in the space, but ultimately came to the conclusion that like, one, well, maybe, you know, that's an expensive thing to do, you know, for all of us. All of us or some of us are going to have to sweep all of our customers' funds, which at this point is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin whenever we decide this new BIP. Maybe we can just have good relationships with these companies, you know, carve out the exceptions we need, get interoperability agreements, you know, like, you know, grown-ups and businesses do, to make sure that, you know, these hardware wallet manufacturers don't do something that would lead to not coin loss or anything like that, but would lead to just standard not being able to sign a transaction on one of these collaborative custody. And that's where like they carved out these paths for these unhardened or carved out these exceptions for these unhardened paths that gives us the flexibility in Blockstream and Casa, the flexibility to serve their customers without the overhang of worry of like, maybe that device won't sign the next day, right? But it's also going to allow us to do this as well.
Yeah. And that turned out to be sort of the thing that sort of unlocked a lot of the optimizations that we made to the spec, and that ability to do that also, you know, opens up the possibility for a dead man switch or something like that, which is very useful. And
also for the listeners at a very high level, what we're talking about here is that if Jimmy has, you know, 15 customers on this, he doesn't need, and it's going to be multi-sig. So he's doing 2 of 3 multi-sig. So he doesn't need 3 keys for every customer now. He doesn't have to manage,
ideally you want one set of hardware wallets.
Correct.
For everybody. But, you still get the security of the hardware wallets, which is what you want.
But you want to be able to, and we called this like braiding at Unchained, you want to be able to create distinct accounts and distinct wallets, basically, for where they're deriving their own addresses that don't mix funds.
Right.
Yeah, but you apply the same private key to sign transactions for all those different wallets.
And that's the entire idea of the unhardened derivation, which is what I wanted. And I actually tested a lot of this, right? This was part of my research, was going and creating wallets in Sparrow and Nunchuck. And I actually have like the hardware wallets that I signed with. They're all on Signet, I think, the transactions that I did. And I was able to do exactly what I wanted, right? Like where I would create a transaction and sign it with, like have different accounts, sign from one account to another. That was the testing I did. And use Nunchuck or Sparrow to sign with 3 different hardware wallets and have it go to the, and have it broadcast and be valid. So that was like, I feel like in many ways that research is going to be the basis of a lot of the app. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the core functionality. It's not the whole app. And sometimes building things like recovery are actually more difficult than the core. But I mean, that ended up being a great place to land. And it would have been, to be fair, we would have wanted to do that if we were building the web application as well. Like it would have been the correct way to handle the wallets. But knowing that we can do that and then use existing very good software like Blue Wallet or Nunchuck or Sparrow, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, especially like with Nunchuck, you can just do everything on your phone. So that part was like, I can make this like a completely phone native thing, right? Like where I'm not sure if I can pull it off, but I could have sort of like a web interface that's entirely running locally, basically, and you pull it up on your phone, and
the admin part for you is still a little bit messier, but on their side, they download an iOS app that is great, and they can see everything, and then they get to call you and message you in a standard operating procedure that is secure. Maybe it's Signal, that sort of thing, to then request what to do with the funds.
Right, which is what we want, and that's where we've landed. So that's kind of what happened in the last one. What are we doing next, Will? What are we doing next?
This is the really fun part for me because I get to do fuck all, and you get to write a bunch of code. No, but really, I mean, so we have a plan, basically. There's a few updates that we still need to make to the plan, but we have a good plan at this point, and it really is time to go code. Right? Okay. So we need to start setting up the project, as it were, and building what we plan to build. I encourage you to do a few things, right? So in I would call it a functional spec of describing kind of the end user functionality, as well as some of the admin functionality. There are some things that me as a product manager that I feel incapable of doing, which is
data model.
I can understand data models, but I can't build data models, right? I needed you to do that, and I encourage you to write it down, right? And because again, writing out the data model, and you can get little flow charts and stuff like that working is a lot better than just doing it in code is the first thing you do. And so that constitutes a plan. And when we have a plan that we both agree is sufficient, it's time to code, right? It's time to get going. And I'm not going to do fuck all. I actually explained in the podcast, there's a lot of things a PM can be doing during this time. I can be getting ready for testing, later, the future phases. We should be communicating during this, because even if we were incrementing through and we thought we knew everything, you're going to run into problems, right? You're going to run into things that we didn't anticipate. This isn't, software engineering is only kind of engineering, right? It's like a lot of things change in the plan as you go, no matter how good you are. As opposed,
well, that's all engineering.
Yeah,
You're building a building. You're still you're gonna
Yeah.
have stuff that comes up.
the water table's a little bit higher than we were expecting. But comparably, there's a lot more of them in software, right? And so mainly my role at this point is to support you, right, as a product manager. And if I need to update the spec, I update the spec. Sometimes you'll be building stuff and we'll want to go all the way back and update the strategy. But we need to stay in communication so that the end result of what you build, in this case, I'm a little bit more of a disinterested stakeholder in all of this, right?
Unless you're going to have an account with me.
I just want you to be happy, but in a business context, if you go off and build this and we don't talk and then come back and I'm just like, what, are you reading the same doc I am? This is we should be. And I like setting up during this process too, kind of arbitrary deadlines for ourselves.
Okay.
I want us to, do demos and stuff. So you might say like, okay, I don't have the whole thing, but I want to demo this part of it. Like, is this what we're doing? It's helpful. It's helpful to me, but it's really helpful for the developer, I think, ultimately to get that feedback, on incremental parts of the project so that you're not just showing everything at the end and having customers say, I don't like it. You learn as you go. And there are usually some pretty logical ways to break that up. I did miss one thing though.
Okay, what's that?
If we want to get serious about this, and I think maybe we need to do this for ourselves, is that we have a plan. We don't have a schedule.
Okay.
And I do talk about schedules a lot, which are engineering estimates. And those are difficult.
They are. I mean,
if you have a good plan, you should be able to do a good estimate.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have most of the data model in my head. I haven't written it down, which I will do. But mostly it's the admin interface and the code around that is the bulk of the work.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin aspect of it, like getting the transactions prepared and stuff, I think I could get that done in a few days, right?
Yeah.
Like that's pretty easy.
And then we do need to define the standard operating procedures around communication. Right. We've talked about them, but we don't have a really tight grasp on that.
Right. So it's usually they notify me in some way, shape, or form, and then I verify it with them in some way, shape, or form. And then I execute the transaction, something like that.
Yeah.
So that now are there security vulnerabilities in that flow? Probably, but so like maybe there's when they notify me and I'm doing the verification, I need to have like a person-to-person phone call, right? Like
or a video conversation.
Right. And hopefully I can tell if they're under distress.
That was one of the things we did at Unchained, right? Is like people can set up video verifications when they request Unchained to use their key in a transaction, right? Unchained, it behooves both parties to know that the person requesting Unchained to use the key, is who they claim to be, right? And so they can do like a video, and we have like a pre-video to compare it to, and of course there's deep fakes and all these things now. There's lots of things you can do, but your security goes up as the stakes go up, right? And you need something sufficient for the stakes with your family.
Hopefully you have some relationship with your family so you could kind of tell. So that's part of it. But then executing the transaction is that's the part where
we have a good grasp on that.
Yeah. So here are the hardware wallets, and go get them and get them signed. And the plan is to do most for the hardware wallets that allow it, do things through air gap QR codes and Cold Card, Passport, Jade all support that,
and Foundation.
Foundation.
Oh, is that Passport?
Passport,
okay,
yeah. And then I haven't checked out the new Blockstream wallet, but I imagine that the newer Jade is actually better than the older Jade. So so that would actually help out.
That's the one I have the least amount of experience with. Is the Jade wallets.
Okay,
but I've heard they're great.
Well, so I did use it as part of the nunchuck setup, and it seemed to work. The only problem with the Sparrow wallet was that the QR code on the Jade was not being interpreted by the webcam on my Mac that had the Sparrow wallet, because the brightness is like something is up with that. So, which is why their new one is interesting, because it's actually supposed to be bigger and more easily read by cameras and so on.
Got it.
So, and why Nunchuck can read it, because your phone camera is typically way better than the webcam on your laptop. So,
but I want to get back to this for a second, because like the setting of the schedule is not just so I can yell at a programmer when they're late on something like that, right? It's also a stress test on the spec, because accurately estimating engineering work is very, very difficult. It's especially difficult when you don't know what you're building, right? So the more difficult the estimation is, it's probably reflecting poorly on the spec. Like the spec isn't sufficient in some way, right? Now, in an organization, you learn this over time, right? You find out, well, we were 80% accurate in our estimations, and you try to dig into why were they off or something like that, right? And it might be the spec, it might be the strategy, it might be the engineer's just bad at estimating, right? All those things can be fixed, right? In our case, we have a one shot here. We just need to be, you need to be able to look at that. And I would say in our scenario right now is like, we want to differentiate between hours and days and days and weeks, right?
Okay.
That's, some people would call this like t-shirt sizing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Where you're not trying to get it down to the hour necessarily, because again, this isn't an organization with those types of stakes. But if we can say an XL means 7 days of work, and an L means 3 days of work, and a M means 1 day of work, and a small means 4 hours of work. If we can differentiate the chunks of work we need by that, I think that'll be sufficient.
Okay. All right. So let's go over what we need to build, right?
Okay.
So there's creating the first, like creating the wallet structure, the overall wallet structure, so that you have accounts,
which is kind of our back end.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's kind of the back end that also lives on the Bitcoin blockchain, kind of. So it's all the UTXO management and stuff like that. It's we have this nice spec. I already have the code from my library and things like that. So I know how to work that, and I've played with it already. So I know how to do that. So there's the part where I have to export a descriptor,
correct,
so that my customers can load it into their Blue Wallet.
Yes.
Right? And I can walk them through that, but I need some file that I can send them either through secure chat or email or something like that they can load.
Probably the same protocol you are going to communicate over anyway.
Yeah. So maybe Telegram or something like that.
Telegram, Signal are usually good.
And it's there. They can load it, and they can show it on their Blue Wallet. Now they can see their balance or whatever.
Yep.
So that's one part is some export of the descriptor.
And let's be really clear to the people listening here. When we say exporting a descriptor, this is set up a watch-only wallet, right? On a piece of software, we're thinking Blue Wallet, where they can see their balances. They can probably see their transaction history as well. But that's about it. Like there's no private key information being distributed here. So we would feel confident sending this over something like Signal, again, because our attack surface on this, should that descriptor be discovered or their phone get lost, is a loss of privacy, but not a loss of funds. Right.
So that's a trade-off we're willing to make on that score. So there's the exporting of the descriptor, which I think there's a descriptor part of the library too. So I think that's more or less doable, right? Like without that's maybe like a day or something like that.
Yeah, let's role play this a little bit.
Okay,
like I don't want it to be a day or something like that. Let's build that up. If we have these chunks of, we have 4 hours as our small, right? 1 day is our medium. 3 days is our large.
Put that as a medium. Okay, put that as a medium, right? Okay.
I can already see I'm getting on your nerves. I like it. This is good.
All right. Then I gotta build the back end to actually create and sign transactions.
Okay.
Right. Now there's a database that I also need to build before that. So let's talk
Correct.
about that. So there's a data model, which has sort of their default address that links to their exchange account. So
Yes.
So this is an address at Kraken or Coinbase or River, wherever.
We don't
they're-
really
so
care.
We don't
We're
really
agnostic. Yeah.
care. Although I'm probably gonna end up like helping them all set up those things. So
Sure.
it'll probably be. But there's an address there. That's in the database, and I need to have their username, maybe for like notifications to. And I've built Telegram bots before, so that's that can at least like notify me. Although like it'll just probably be me, so it won't.
Yep. That's where we kind of landed in the spec, was that it's just kind of you.
Yeah, it's just me, and I probably don't need to.
That was one of the reasons we ran out of the web app. If you remember, it was like all the notification stuff we had to build was just like, why don't they just call you?
Yeah. Why don't I just send them?
Yeah. Why aren't you just like their banker that they call instead of like building this entire apparatus?
Yeah. And that sort of like apparatus only makes sense when you're at scale.
Huge
anyway.
scale.
Yeah. And
which,
we're
by the way,
small.
this could turn into a product like that, but we don't need to build that now.
Yeah.
That's the concept of like an MVP, a minimum viable product.
And I don't want it to get back. I really don't.
Yeah, and it's certainly viable without it.
Yeah. All right, so so the data model and getting all that set up and having some backend, that's maybe another medium, because it's been a while since I've had to build like sort of that admin web app, which is going to be the main thing that's interacting with that database.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I need to, hey, here's a new account. My sister had a new baby, I don't know, or something like that, and now we're gonna start an account for my niece or something.
You want to see me be a really good PM here?
What's that?
I said, do you want to see me be a really good product manager here?
What's that?
Based off what you just described, I think that's a 3-day project.
Doing that?
Yeah.
Like creating the
doing
data?
that to completion.
Okay, the data model.
The data model, in setting up the database and contextualizing it to and everything you want to do right there.
Okay.
I think it.
I mean, it feels like a CRUD app, and I'm planning to use like ChatGPT to make a lot of it. But it's probably. It's been a while since
because I think you might have a couple rounds on it. Is all I'm saying.
All right, fair enough. So that's a large, right?
Yeah,
3
I'll call
days.
it a large. Yeah.
All right. And that's admin part, and then there's the actual transaction execution. That I'm actually kind of confident on, because I've tested a lot of it. Although if I don't want to use Sparrow or Nunchuck to do that,
that's the big question.
Yeah. So
because if you're using Sparrow or Nunchuck, that's a 1-day thing. You just want to set it up. You want to test out your workflow a few times, test out your physical security, and then say that's a wrap.
So that would mean that I have basically a watch-only wallet on my end of all the stuff that they have. It's just that I'm signing with the other stuff.
Correct. Yeah.
And that might be the way to do it. I don't know. And then that reduces the attack surface on the app, because I don't have to. Although I still need to pull the address and create the transaction and then like send it into Sparrow or
correct. But you don't have to build Sparrow.
Right.
Which is a pretty big application.
Yeah, which is so that's probably the way to do it. Is to have a transaction that those applications can import.
Correct.
And the wallets are all set up there. So there's another aspect then. That means that all the wallets have to be loaded into these applications.
Correct.
Which I guess is basically the same thing as the first thing that we said, the descriptor.
It is.
Right. I just have to make sure that it can handle multiple, which I'm sure they do. So there we go. All right. Yeah. So that makes it easier, because that basically is repurposing the first thing for this part. Just the transaction creation aspect, and then put it into the And then okay, so that seems like maybe
that's what's described in the spec right now.
Yeah,
is that I didn't say you would be using Sparrow, but I think it was like Sparrow or Nunchuck is in the spec right now. It was like we contemplated when we were building the larger web app that maybe you would be building something on your own there, but it's a pretty, I mean, like, now we're talking weeks of development, multiple weeks of development. And it's like, there are really good tools out there, and given what the Bank of Song needs to be from the customer's endpoint, they don't care what you're using, right? This is really about your comfort, right? And if you don't want to build Sparrow from scratch, I would seriously suggest.
I mean, I guess, even the transaction thing, I could just... I don't know if there's like a memo field in any of these or whatever, but have like a default address on each of those accounts. I'm pretty sure Sparrow has that, right?
Sparrow
like
does.
you can have labeled addresses.
Correct.
And then you that's the only labeled address for each account. And then like I don't even have to create the transaction. I can just have it make the transaction for me, sign it, and then broadcast it, I guess. And if I want it to be extra secure, I can have Sparrow running on a laptop or something.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think it needs access to the blockchain, so
It's probably on the server. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, but regardless,
but we do want to get that part into the spec, and then we'll estimate that out really. And one last thing
that seems like a medium-ish, right? Like, 'cause
I think so too.
Yeah.
And then from my side, I'll work with you on it, but there is a non-software thing that we need to build.
What's that?
Which is a standard operating procedure. Like it's really it's a piece of the product you want to be able to give to your customer to tell them how to interact with this stuff, right? It's almost like a FAQ page of sorts, but it's probably something that we email or deliver them a hard copy of that describes how to interact with the Bank of Song, right? What's expected of them, what they need to do, what they need to download, all that type of stuff. And really, it's probably a 1 or 2 page document that we like give to them.
That seems like a small, right?
Small, it's gonna take a few hours, but it is a non-software thing that we need to build during this process.
And then the last thing is sort of the dead man switch. So that's probably the most tricky part, but it's also not that bad because as long as you know the addresses.
Yep.
And it's all on the hardware wallet setup that you already have anyway. Then you just create the transaction, have it signed, but then you keep that back and then upload it to whatever trigger mechanism you might have.
Yeah, and so this is a part where I'm gonna default to you more. But there are a couple of things that we need to think about in a dead man switch, based on my understanding, but I could be being stupid on this. Is like you describe pre-signing the transaction, basically, right? However, if the UTXO set changes, anytime you have to reset that dead man switch.
Right. So that's something that you have to...
There's maintenance in here.
There's definitely maintenance, and that's something that... So there's 2 kind of ways to do it, and maybe this is like more a specification thing. And, so maybe we should talk about this.
So
right
we
now.
didn't put this just so everyone here. It's like we defined that we needed a dead man switch, but we didn't elucidate the details of the dead man switch yet in the spec, which we do need to do. Okay,
right. So there's 2 ways to do this.
Yeah,
you could do it on a per account basis.
Yes.
Or you can do one Uber transaction.
Yeah.
The thing about the per account is that it only changes when somebody does something on it, and all the other ones can kind of stay static. So that's
nice.
That's kind of a nice thing. The Uber one is nice because you only have to broadcast one transaction, right?
But every single time the UTXO set changes for any of them, you have to maintain.
Right, but you have to maintain. Either for the first case,
do it anyway.
If there are 20 accounts,
it's not more work for you.
Yeah, you have to update 20. Yep. It's actually more work for the first one.
You're right. Yeah.
Right. But like conceptually, I guess it's a little more complicated.
Frequency remains the same though. Every time something changes, you have to update it.
Yeah. The maintenance or the marginal cost of keeping it updated is about the same.
So not for this, but in the future, there's probably something to do to make the maintenance burden less with miniscript in the future and time lock.
If you use a time lock, well, the thing is, every time you spend, you get a new UTXO, so that needs
Correct.
to go somewhere.
But I think you can automate some of that.
Well, so you still need the
You still need a new
wallets.
signature, though.
Yeah, you need
Yeah.
the signatures.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrrong.
I mean, I think if
This is where I'm.
well, so this is where
not as
stuff
good.
like CTV actually like could help. Like,
Oh damn it! Are we about to become
no.
CTV shills on
Like
here?
the thing is,
It
if
would
you have
work.
a template, then
Yeah,
you
that's
could just sign that template and you're
Yep,
done.
that's right.
But because we don't have it, what is the way to do it? Is to pre-sign the transaction. So I actually talked about this with a friend of mine about like how you can make that work so that you can give them you can actually like give your customers the pre-signed transaction,
Yep.
but they're not valid until the dead man switch transaction goes through.
Yes.
So that is a possibility, but I'm thinking now that that's probably like overcomplicated. Like I'm not sure that, like this is the worst thing that happens if the pre-signed transaction goes out is that everyone gets their money, right? Like it's not.
Yeah. Can we talk about the security aspects of this? Because you're right. I mean, like there's a side of me that pre-signed transactions, that's nuclear material all of a sudden. But the end result is that it goes to it can only execute that transaction.
That's the idea of covenants, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to think in this case what the security surface area is. Like the worst thing that could happen is that someone who knows the setup compromises one of the receive wallets, right? And then or one or multiple of the receive wallets, and then is able to come through and execute
A pre-signed transaction.
a broadcast of a pre-signed transaction, and that's a problem because if a receive account was compromised without the pre-signed transactions and someone was made aware that it was, there would be no coin loss. But in this case, there would be.
Well, what the attacker would need to do is get the pre-signed transaction and get access to whatever account, right?
Yeah.
Like, in which case they would lose it.
Yeah.
So maybe
But that's the attack surface.
Yeah.
And so we just need to think about like knowing that's the worst case scenario. Like, how do we make one of those sides much, much more difficult to achieve?
Yeah.
Now, not having pre-signed
if
transactions is one way to do it, but that's not an
But
option.
you can pre-sign it, but make it so that it's not within the control of the recipient, right? The customer. So they don't get the sort of unilateral exit transaction.
I'll throw out a totally different thing, which is not automating the transactions at all, right? But in the event that, the dead man switch in this case is that we could reveal the private key material or how to use it in the case,
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to prevent, because that's like a lot of work, right?
that makes your customers get into things that we don't want them to get into.
Yeah, like I like learning about like what ends up happening in a lot of these scenarios anyway is that once somebody dies, they bring in somebody and they have to trust that person to act honestly.
Be like Will.
Yeah.
Has to come in and do this now.
No, that might not be the worst thing, honestly. But ideally, it's just sort of, hey, here are the instructions. Like there are dead man switches and certain like password.
This is going to hit your account in
things.
3 months.
Yeah. So it's you can set it up so that there's a recipient after a certain number of months that gets all your material, and one of the material could be, hey, here's the transaction, here are the instructions, go paste this and mempool.space/tx/push.
Yep.
And then it'll be everybody will have their money in their account and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I think we should keep the other version in our back pocket in case this becomes difficult. We're going to spec out more on that a little bit, but it's in everything we've talked about so far, this is the most speculative.
Yeah. And but I think if we do it that way, right? One Uber transaction that
that'd be great.
goes into something that gets broadcast only after 3 months of me not accessing something.
Yep.
Assuming that service is, of course, this is the problem with dead man switches, by the way, is like assuring that the service stays, or like it's kind of hard to test whether or not those services actually work, right? So, but you know, what you can do, and probably what I will do, is have another copy with like my lawyer or something, right? And be like, hey, here.
Yeah, the fallback could be your lawyer or some trusted.
Here's the Uber transaction, and I
know how to broadcast this. Do it.
Like go do this and this immediately upon my death or something like that. So that would be the way to do it at which point. But yeah, like there's enough there of the details that I feel fairly confident that I can start coding on it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. Yeah, so there we go.
There we go. Yeah, so I think setting up the expectation for everyone, we at this point, we have a spec. We'll have a schedule. We'll publish those documents so you can actually see what we did. We do have a little bit of work to do on the spec based on this conversation, but next time you see us, Jimmy will have written software. And then we'll kind of combine the last two phases of product development together. In this case, that's the QA portion, and delivering this to customers. We'll do one last episode sort of talking about that.
Yeah. So that sounds like a plan, and hopefully I'll have it all up on my GitHub, and people can download it and try it and stuff like that. But this is what product development looks like. It's and this is something that I think a lot of people kind of mistake about software development, is that they think like it's mostly like somebody like writing code all the time.
It's mostly not.
It's mostly not. And like I hope this series kind of shows it, because I mean I played with stuff, and I've coded random things to test to see if things work, but the actual product that I'm coding, I haven't done any of it yet. And the thing is, by the next episode, it'll just sort of be like, okay, yeah, Jimmy did it.
Yeah. But there were 1,000 decisions that had to be made before that, before you wrote a single line of code. And that's really the point of having a process at all, right? Is that, I think a lot of people look at software development and think exactly what you said, that it is all about writing code. And it's like, well, I mean, it's a necessary and very important part of it. And there are highly skilled people that do that. And, but there's a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah, and I've told people that are interested in becoming coders or whatever, you're only going to spend like at most 1/4 of your time actually coding. Yeah. Most of your time is in speccing and meeting and QA and things like that, which take up a significant amount of time.
And research and
or trying things and reading documentation and
put it this way, I don't know any programmer who writes code for 9 hours a day every day.
Like, there's not a thing. I mean, even 2 hours a day. Like it's
4 hours would be like a really good day. If you know exactly what you want to do.
And that tends to happen when you're in sort of that incremental mode, like you were saying, right? Like where you
all
know exactly what to make. And you're just sort of like, and if you're doing like test-driven development, it's just sort of like, okay, I know which tests need to pass. I just need to go get them to pass. That's it. Right. So that tends to be the fun part. But so I get to do the fun part next.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. So
cool. All right, let's do it.
All that needs to be done is to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.